Hi students, it's Shayna, your teacher from EspressoEnglish.net, and today I'd like to teach you the phrasal verb stick around. Before I start today's lesson, I wanted to tell you that if you're interested in learning more phrasal verbs, I have a course called Phrasal Verbs in Conversation, and you can actually take a free sample lesson so you can see exactly what's in this course. You can click on the link in this video or in the description of the video for the free sample. I hope you'll enjoy it. Let's learn what it means to stick around. I have three possible definitions on the board, and only one of them is correct. So I'll tell you a little story or give you a situation where we would use the phrasal verb stick around, and you need to try to guess the correct answer, A, B, or C. So when I was a child, I would go to church with my family. It was my parents and my brother and I. And after the service was over, my parents liked to stick around and socialize. They had a lot of friends at the church, and so they would stick around for maybe 20 or 30 minutes after the service was over. Well, my brother and I, we didn't want to stick around, so we would usually ask for the house key and then walk home from church. We could do that because the church was right in the same neighborhood as our house. So my parents stuck around for 20 or 30 minutes after the service, but my brother and I, we didn't stick around. We came home instead. So based on this situation, what do you think it means to stick around? Does it mean A, to offer help, B, to stay in a place, or C, talk to a lot of people? You can post your answer in the comments, and in just a moment I will tell you which one is the correct definition. Stick around means B, stay in a place. So in the situation I described, my parents would stick around. They would stay at church even after the service was over because they wanted to socialize with their friends. But stick around doesn't mean to socialize. Stick around just means to stay in that place. I remember this phrasal verb very well because when I went to Brazil for the first time, this was before I was an English teacher. I was just a student. And I actually went to an English class so that the Brazilian students could talk with the native speaker. And after the class, they were going to do another activity. I think they were going to go to a museum or something like that. And the teacher asked me, "Oh, would you like to join us for this next activity?" And I replied, "Yeah, I think I'll stick around for a while." And a lot of the students looked at me like, "What does that mean, stick around?" And I quickly explained that stick around means to stay in this situation or stay with the group of students. You can also use stick around not just for staying in a physical place, but in a situation like I just described, staying in a situation or staying with a person. For example, if you have a friend who has had bad luck in romantic relationships, then you might say she's had a lot of boyfriends in her life, but none of them have stuck around. That means none of the boyfriends have stayed with her or stayed in that relationship. I hope this helps you understand what it means to stick around. Why don't you go ahead and try to use it in your own sentence? Post a comment under this video and try to use the phrasal verb stick around. And again, if you'd like to take a sample lesson from the Phrasal Verbs in Conversation course, the sample lesson is exactly what you're going to get in the course. It will be a dialogue that will teach you between 15 and 20 phrasal verbs, and then a quiz and some exercises for you to put them into practice. That's all for today's lesson. Bye. Hi students, it's Shayna, your teacher at EspressoEnglish.net, and in today's daily phrasal verb lesson, I want to teach you the phrasal verb come up. Before I begin, I wanted to invite you to check out my Phrasal Verbs in Conversation course. This is one of my most popular courses at Espresso English because it focuses on the phrasal verbs that are really, really common in everyday spoken English. And it teaches you these phrasal verbs through dialogues, natural situations where we would use them. So make sure to click on the link in this video or in the description for more information and registration in my phrasal verbs course. Let's learn about come up. Here are three options, three possible definitions of this phrasal verb, and only one is correct. I'd like you to guess which one, A, B, or C, and post your answer in the comments, and then keep watching until the end of this video to see if you're right. So, does come up mean appear unexpectedly, become popular, or improve? A, B, or C? Let me describe a situation where we'd use it. Let's say that you work at a software company, so making computer programs, and one day you're going to launch a new version of the software to all of your customers. And you're part of the team that will ensure that this launch goes smoothly. So on the day of the big launch, you launch the new version of the software and you work all day on it, and then a couple days later, your manager asks how the launch went, and you tell him, well, a few technical issues came up during the launch, but my team and I have already handled them, and now everybody is satisfied. So based on that situation, what do you think it means to come up? Does it mean to appear unexpectedly, to become popular, or to improve? Ready to find out? Come up means to appear unexpectedly. So in this situation, when I said a few technical issues came up during the launch, that means that there were a few issues or a few problems that appeared, and they were unexpected, but fortunately, me and my team, we handled them and we were able to satisfy all the customers. You'll often see this phrasal verb come up used with the words problems, issues, or something. So I said some technical issues came up. I could also say some problems came up during the launch. Sometimes when people don't go to something they were planning on going to, they say, oh, something came up. In other words, some other problem or responsibility appeared. Maybe their child got sick, maybe their car needed to be taken into the mechanic. Something came up, some problem, some issue appeared unexpectedly, and then that person couldn't go to the event they were planning on going to. Come up can also be used in a slightly different way when talking about conversations. So if something comes up in conversation, it means it appears. Not necessarily unexpectedly, maybe unexpectedly, but not necessarily. For example, let's say you're having a meeting with your team at the software company, and some people make suggestions for the next version of the software. And so later you could tell your manager, hey, here are a few suggestions that came up during the meeting. Came up in this case means they were introduced into the conversation. They appeared in the conversation. Or if your manager asks, oh, well, what did the team think about the new website design? Then you might say, oh, that didn't come up during the meeting. In other words, we didn't talk about it. This topic did not appear in the conversation. All right, so now that you have an idea of how to use come up, I'd love to see you use it in a sentence. Remember, putting these phrasal verbs into practice is really important to help you remember them better. So post a comment and try to use come up in your own sentence. Inside my phrasal verbs course, if you join Phrasal Verbs in Conversation, there are also opportunities for you to write your own sentences using the phrasal verbs in the course and actually send them to me for feedback. So I'll correct them and let you know if you've used that phrasal verb correctly. So if that interests you, make sure to click on the link for the course, Phrasal Verbs in Conversation. Thank you for watching me today. I hope you've enjoyed today's daily phrasal verb lesson, and I will see you in the next one. Bye-bye.
It was 6 o'clock. I was tired. It was time to go home. I did not like my work in the shop. I often had headaches, and my feet were always tired. The streets were hot and busy. Everybody was going home. Their faces looked sad. I passed a flower shop. It was dark and quiet. The flowers smelled sweet, and their leaves were wet. I stopped. I looked in my purse. I had a little money. I went into the shop and bought a bunch of flowers. At home, I put the flowers in a vase. They looked beautiful. I put the vase on the table. I began to make supper. My father came in. "Where's my food?" he said. "Nearly ready, Father," I said. He picked up a bottle of whiskey. He poured some into a glass. The bottle was nearly empty. "Give me some money, girl," he said. "I need some more whiskey." "You don't need any more," I said. "Please, Father, don't buy any more." "Shut up and give me some money," he said. "I haven't got any," I said. My father was angry. He began to shout at me. He pointed to the flowers. "You spend money on flowers," he said. He picked up the vase and threw it on the floor. The vase broke. My father went out and shut the door with a bang. He will get money from a friend, I thought. He will come home drunk again tonight. I picked up the broken flowers and threw them away. Somebody knocked at the door. I did not want to open it. It isn't a friend, I thought. Nobody comes here now. The person knocked again and called my name. I opened the door. It was the old man from next door. "Come in, George," I said. Old George came in and sat down. "I heard your father," he said. "You poor girl. Can I help you?" I wanted to talk to old George. "What can I do?" I said. "Father drinks whiskey all the time. He hasn't got a job. He takes all my money and spends it on drink. Today I bought some flowers. He was angry. He broke the vase. Sometimes I hate him." "Do you like flowers?" asked old George. "I love them," I said, "but they cost a lot of money." "Why don't you grow some on your balcony?" "Grow flowers?" I asked. "I'll show you," said old George. "I was a gardener once." The next day I came home quickly from work. George was waiting outside his flat. "Come and see," he said. I went inside the old man's flat. He had some flower pots and some packets of seeds. George and I carried the flower pots into my flat. We filled them with earth and planted the seeds. We put the pots on the balcony. Every evening, George and I worked in our balcony garden. George taught me a lot about flowers. He talked about different flowers, about their colour and beauty. I was happy in my garden. I forgot about my father and my hard work at the shop. George was my friend. I was not lonely any more.
The picture sequence from the cinema has finished. You can look at it once more if you want.
Months passed. My garden became larger and more beautiful. The flowers opened. My father never came onto the balcony. He did not like flowers. He did not like George. My father was drinking all the time. He always asked me for money, and he often hit me. He looked ill. George was ill too. He coughed and coughed. He was thin and weak. Sometimes he did not come to our garden. He did not leave his bed. One day I cooked some food and took it to George. He was lying in bed. He did not turn and smile at me. He did not move. I went closer to him. His eyes were open. I touched his hand. It was cold. He was dead. I went back to our flat. My father was there. He was waiting for his supper. "George is dead," I said. I began to cry. "He was kind to me. I will miss him." My father looked at me, but he said nothing. He took some money and went out of the house. My father came home late that night. "Why are you crying?" he said. "Are you crying for George? You loved that silly old man, didn't you? What about me? I'm your father. You don't care about me." I said nothing. My father began to shout. "I've got a surprise for you, my girl. A nice young man. What do you think of that? He's a good boy. He's a friend of mine. You need a man, not a garden." I stared at my father. I said nothing. "Look at yourself," my father said. "You're not pretty, and you're getting old. Nobody else will marry you." "No, father, no," I said. "I'm not going to marry anybody. I'm staying here. I don't want to leave my garden." "Your garden? Your garden?" my father shouted. "Your silly garden. You spend all your money on plants. You never give me money. You don't talk to me. You talk to old George. I hated him, and I hate your garden." I ran away from my father. I went to my bedroom and locked the door. There was a lot of noise. My father was shouting and breaking things. After a long time, the noise stopped. I left my bedroom and went to the balcony. The balcony door was open. I looked out. The pots were broken and the plants were torn to pieces. The garden was ruined. I went to my father's room. "I hate him," I said to myself. "I'll tell him. He can kill me. I don't care." My father's door was locked. I banged and shouted. He did not open it. He did not hear me. He was asleep. He was drunk. I went back to my room. What shall I do? I thought. Where shall I go? I looked round the room. I took some clothes and packed them in a bag. I found some packets of flower seeds and put them in the bag. Then I took my purse and counted my money. I did not have very much.
The picture sequence from the cinema has finished. You can look at it once more if you want.
I left the flat and shut the door quietly. I stood outside George's door for a minute. I wanted to say goodbye. It was dark outside. The roads were empty. There were no cars or people. It was very late. I must leave the town, I said to myself. I must go to the country. Perhaps I can work in a garden. Some hours later, morning came. People were going to work. There were some cars on the road. A bus came along. It stopped near me. I climbed onto it. On the bus, I fell asleep. Then somebody touched my arm. I woke up. "The bus stops here," a man said. "You must get off." I got off the bus and looked round. I was in a small village. The town was far away. I was hungry. I went to a cafe and sat down. I bought some bread and tea. Now I had very little money. I must find work, I thought. I spoke to the waiter. "Can you help me?" I asked him. "I don't know this place. I need work. I can work as a gardener. Who can give me a job?" The waiter thought for a moment. "There's Mrs. Jack," he said. "She's got a market garden. Perhaps she can help you." Mrs. Jack's market garden was 2 miles away. I was very tired, but I walked fast. The garden was on the side of a hill. There was a notice over the gate. Jack's Garden. Fresh vegetables and fruit for sale. I stood at the gate and looked inside. I saw a long line of greenhouses and a field of fruit trees. There was a small house behind the field. I liked the place.
The picture sequence from the cinema has finished. You can look at it once more if you want.
A woman came out of the house. She saw me at the gate and came up to me. "Who are you?" she said. "What do you want?" "Can you give me a job?" I asked. "No work here," said the woman. She turned and walked away. Suddenly, she stopped and came back. "Wait a minute," she said. "We have a new greenhouse. I'll need some help. Come with me." I followed Mrs. Jack to the house. She asked me many questions about plants and gardening. I knew the answers. Old George was a good teacher. "I'll give you a job," said Mrs. Jack. "You can start today." She smiled for the first time. Mrs. Jack gave me a room in her house. I worked hard for her, and I loved the work. I liked the country. I liked the fresh air and the sunshine. I did not think about my father, but I often thought about George. Mrs. Jack was kind. She paid me well for my work and gave me good food. But I did not like her son Harry. He was a big man with thick glasses. He did not talk much or smile. He watched me all the time. His eyes followed me. One day I was working in the new greenhouse. I was watering the tomatoes. "I'm safe here," I thought to myself. "I'm far away from my father and his friend." I heard somebody behind me. I turned round. It was Harry. He took my hand and smiled at me. "I like you," he said. "You're a nice girl." I pushed Harry away. "Go away," I said. "Don't touch me. I hate men. You're all the same. You drink and fight and break things. Leave me alone." I ran out of the greenhouse. I wanted to be alone. After that day, Harry did not look at me. He did not speak to me. I was glad. One day I had an idea. I need my own little garden, I thought. I'll grow some flowers. Then I will forget about Father and Harry. I'll make something beautiful. There was a small piece of ground near the house. I pulled out the weeds and dug the earth. I had George's packet of flower seeds. I planted them in my new garden and watched them grow. My new garden grew well. The flowers had beautiful colours. They smelt sweet. One day, Mrs. Jack visited my garden. "Look, Mrs. Jack," I said, "flowers grow well here. Why don't we grow some in the market garden? You sell fruit and vegetables. We can sell flowers too. You can make more money." "That's a good idea," Mrs. Jack said. "It's your idea, and you can do the work. But where will you sell the flowers? There's no flower shop here." I remembered the flower shop in the city. It was near my father's flat. I bought my first bunch of flowers in that shop. Next day, I got up early. I picked some of my best flowers. I took the bus to the city. In the city, the streets were hot. The people looked tired. Life is better in the country, I thought. The people in the country are happier. I walked quickly to the flower shop. I looked round all the time. I did not want to meet my father. The people in the shop were friendly. "Yes, we'll buy your flowers," said the manager. "They are very, very beautiful."
The picture sequence from the cinema has finished. You can look at it once more if you want.
I was pleased. I thought of Mrs. Jack and my garden in the country. I wanted to go back at once. I left the shop and began to walk quickly. On the corner of the street there was a beggar. He was old and very thin. His clothes were dirty. He had dirty hair and red eyes. He put out his hand. "Help me, lady," he said. "Help a poor old man." I knew his voice. I looked at him. It was my father. I wanted to run away. I wanted to go back to the country and forget my father forever. But I stood still. I felt sorry for him. "Father," I said. His old red eyes looked up. There were tears in them. He knew me. "It's you?" he said. "What happened to you, Father?" I asked. "You ran away," he said. "You left me. I was ill for a long time. I was lonely without you. I was a bad father, but you were always a good daughter. You worked hard. I took all your money and sometimes I hit you. I broke up your garden. Don't talk about it, Father," I said. "I wanted to buy whiskey," he said, "but I didn't have any money. My friends left me. They didn't want me anymore. Now I'm a lonely old man. I stand here and beg. Sometimes people give me a little money. I get a little food. I sold the furniture in the flat, but I kept your things for you." I thought again of my new life in the country. I felt all round me the sadness of the city. I took my father's arm. "Come on, Father," I said. "We're going home." There was not much furniture in the flat. There were dirty cups and plates in the kitchen. There was a bad smell of dirt and old food. I looked round sadly. My father saw my face. "Everything is dirty," he said. "I can't clean the flat. You made everything nice. I needed you here. I did not say anything. I went to my room. Everything was the same. I thought of my last night at home. It was a long time ago. I went back to my father. I began to clean the flat. The next day, I wrote a letter to Mrs. Jack. I told her everything. I am sorry. I cannot work for you any more, I wrote. I must stay here and look after my father. I began my old life once more. I took my old job again. I came home every evening and cooked for my father. I did not make my garden again. I felt too sad. My father was very different now. He did not drink any more. He looked much older. He talked to me kindly. But he lived in the past. Sometimes he talked to my mother. But my mother was dead. She died a long time ago. One evening, somebody knocked on the door. I opened it. It was Mrs. Jack's son, Harry. He was holding a large bunch of flowers. They were flowers from my little garden in the country.
The picture sequence from the cinema has finished. You can look at it once more if you want.
We're selling flowers to the flower shop now, he said. I bring them to the city every week. But these are for you. He gave me the flowers and left quickly. The flowers were beautiful. I'll make my balcony garden again, I thought. I worked on my garden every evening. Soon flowers began to grow on the balcony again. My father liked the garden. He sat all day on the balcony. Sometimes he slept. Sometimes he talked to himself. Harry came every week and brought me flowers. He never spoke. He gave me the flowers and went away. Come in and have a cup of tea, Harry, I said one day. He came in and sat down quietly. Come and see my balcony garden, I said. My father was sitting on the balcony. Harry sat down beside him. I went to the kitchen and made some tea. I heard their voices. They were laughing. I was happy. The old man needs a friend, I thought. Harry was kind to my father. They talked and laughed. I watched them. I was wrong about Harry, I thought. He is kind and gentle. Every week, Harry came to the flat. He and my father became friends. My father loved his visits. I often looked at Harry. Behind the thick glasses, his eyes were kind and gentle. He often smiled now. I saw other things too. I saw his kindness to my father. I saw his love for flowers. One day I was watering the plants in my balcony garden. My father was asleep in the sun. Harry came up to me. He put his arms round me. I want to ask you something, he said. Yes, Harry, I said. I'm listening. But Harry said nothing. I looked at his eyes. I understood. It's all right, Harry, I said. The answer is yes.
The picture sequence from the cinema has finished. You can look at it once more if you want.